She thought I was too blind to see her pour that powder into my glass on the night of my own anniversary dinner. Before I go on, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe. What happened next will shock you. The chandeliers above us glowed like frozen suns, scattering shards of golden light across the polished mahogany tables of the harbor room. It was the kind of place where every plate looked like a piece of art, where the wine list had its own leather-bound volume, and where each polished fork weighed just a little too heavy in the hand, as if reminding you how expensive it was to be sitting there. I had saved 3 long months of pension checks just to book that night. 50 years married to Eleanor, my Eleanor, and I wanted her to feel like she was the queen she had always been in my eyes. I had rehearsed the evening in my head dozens of times. Eleanor's smile, the gentle clink of glasses, the comfort of memories flowing as easily as the champagne. I wanted her eyes to sparkle like they had under that Carolina sky when I first asked her to be my wife. But fate has a cruel way of mocking plans. That night, it wasn't Eleanor's eyes I noticed first. It was her daughter's. Leah, my stepdaughter. She was elegance, wrapped in silk, her posture immaculate, her lipstick painted with the kind of precision that suggested calculation, not carelessness. She leaned forward ever so slightly, her head tilted in an almost affectionate angle, and whispered something low to the waiter. Too soft for Eleanor to catch, but not for me. Decades on the docks had tuned my senses sharp. Men thought they could smuggle crates past me or swap cards in a smoke-filled back room, but I learned to catch the flick of a wrist, the twitch of an eye. You don't survive that long without learning to see what others want hidden. That's when I saw it. The packet, small, pale, fragile as moth wings in her manicured hand. She slid it out like a magician's trick, tearing the corner just enough. My breath caught when the powder floated down, soft as snow, into the rim of my champagne flute. She stirred it with the base of her spoon, her smile curving like a blade hidden in silk. I didn't flinch, not yet. I held my face in the calm mask of a man enjoying his anniversary dinner. But inside, my blood roared in my ears. My fork trembled, not with weakness but with rage. Rage that this night, meant to honor half a century of devotion, had been stained with betrayal. Eleanor didn't notice. Sweet Eleanor, her laugh still as musical as when she was 20. She was telling the old story again, the one of how we danced barefoot on the beach the night we wed. I could almost feel the cool sand between my toes again, the salt clinging to our clothes, the tide soaking our hems as we forgot the world existed. Eleanor's voice had carried me through so much. Through wars fought on foreign soil, through nights staring at unpaid bills, through the slow, cruel creep of age itself. Even now, it was a lifeline. She turned to me then, her hand brushing mine with that familiar warmth. "Darling," she said, her eyes glistening, "I never thought we'd see 50 years, and here you are, still stubborn as the day I met you." I smiled for her sake. I always would. But my gaze slid past her, locking on to Leah, and I swear, beneath her perfect mask, something dark flickered, like a snake's shadow under tall grass. She raised her glass then, her lipstick leaving a crimson crescent on the rim. "To 50 years of commitment," she said. The pause was deliberate. That single word hung in the air, heavy as a noose. My gut twisted. Commitment. Not love, not devotion. Commitment, as though it were a chain, a burden, something to mock. The waiter returned, pouring another round. My glass, the tainted one, was placed before me with a reverence that twisted my stomach. Leah's eyes followed the movement with predatory focus. I hovered my hand above it, brushing the cool stem, feeling the bubbles rise within. To anyone else it was golden joy, sparkling innocence. To me, it was a grave in crystal. Dad. Leah purred, her voice velvet stretched over steel. You should make the first toast. After all, this night is for you. The audacity of her nearly made me laugh. She wanted me to raise that poisoned flute, to drink it down before the room full of unsuspecting witnesses. I pictured Eleanor screaming, her delicate hands clutching at my chest as I fell. Guests rushing forward, waiters fumbling, Leah feigning horror with crocodile tears glistening in the corners of her eyes. My death, neatly choreographed into a champagne toast. But I did not drink. No, not me. I swirled the glass gently, watching the bubbles carry the powder in sickly streaks, and then, with the calmness of a man who has buried comrades and outlived enemies, I let a smile creep across my face. You're right, Leah, I said, my tone soft, almost tender. This night is for me, for us. The words lingered, wrapped in warmth, but inside me was fire. Slowly, deliberately, I turned the glass in the light, letting it shimmer one last time. Then I slid it across the pristine linen toward her. Why don't you join me in it? For my family. Her eyes flickered. Just once. A crack in the porcelain mask she wore so well. Around us, the restaurant had grown quieter, curiosity prickling the air. A few diners glanced our way, their forks frozen mid-air, waiters slowing their stride, Eleanor looking between us with the unshakable belief that family could never turn on family. Leah's fingers brushed the stem. Her ring clinked faintly against the crystal. She hesitated, then lifted the flute, holding it aloft as though the room itself demanded her compliance. Her smile returned, brittle now but still painted across her face. To family, she whispered. I watched as she tipped the glass to her lips. One swallow, two, her throat worked, the poison sliding into her as smoothly as she had planned it for me. The crimson mark of her lipstick deepened on the rim. The taste of revenge wasn't mine yet, not fully, but the seed had been planted, and I knew, in that instant, that the night would unravel far differently than Leah had scripted. I leaned back, my heart steady, my face composed for Eleanor's sake. But deep inside, a storm gathered, for I understood something Leah did not. When a man has lived long enough to see both love and betrayal in their truest forms, he does not fear poison in a glass. No, he learns how to turn it back. And this anniversary dinner, this night I had waited half a century for, was only just beginning. The sound of her swallowing still echoes in my mind, that delicate gulp, barely audible. Yet to me, it roared through the restaurant louder than cannon fire on a battlefield. It was the sound of a choice, a gamble, a dagger turning in the dark. Leah lowered the flute with deliberate care, her fingers clinging to the stem longer than they should have, as though she needed its cold strength to steady her trembling hand. A faint smile touched her lips, but it was brittle, a glaze on porcelain already cracked. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, perhaps to see if I had noticed, or to measure whether I would call her bluff. But I only leaned back, folding my hands across my lap, the picture of calm patience. If she expected a dramatic reaction, she would find only silence. And oh, how that silence stretched, a silence thick enough to choke on. Between us it hummed like a live wire, invisible but searing. Eleanor, sweet Eleanor, didn't hear it. She was still caught up, recounting the endless list of neighbors, cousins, and long-lost friends who had sent flowers and cards for our 50th. Her voice carried joy, but Leah and I, we were locked in a duel without weapons, a battle of gazes and breaths, played beneath the surface of polite conversation. Then came the first break in the evening's rhythm, a single voice that cut through the tension like a bell, tolling in a quiet chapel. "Are you feeling all right, Leah?" Eleanor asked, her fork pausing midair. Her eyes, sharp with motherly concern, narrowed on her daughter's paling face. "You look a bit pale." Leah's laugh was too loud, brittle and jagged. It cracked across the room like glass shattering. Heads turned from nearby tables, drawn by the sound that didn't fit the refined hum of the harbor room. "I'm fine, Mother," she insisted, forcing her voice into a sweet cadence that rang hollow. "Just fine. A bit warm, perhaps." But I heard what others might have missed. The quiver at the end of her words, the tremor under the veneer of elegance. Her composure was slipping, and the room could smell it like blood in water. Even the smallest details betrayed her. The faint squeak of the waiter's polished shoes as he passed behind her, his eyes darting for a moment at her awkward laugh. The low rumble of voices from the bar dipped, conversations faltering as people caught fragments of her too loud dismissal, and even the jazz trio playing near the entrance stumbled for half a measure before finding their rhythm again, as if their instruments themselves sensed the discord at our table. I tapped my spoon against my plate, slow and deliberate. Once, twice, 3 times. Clink, clink, clink. Not loud enough for the whole room, but loud enough for her. Her head snapped toward me, and her breath escaped in a sharp hiss, like steam bursting from a kettle. That was the moment she knew, without doubt, that I had seen her. I was not blind, I was not deaf, and I had no intention of pretending otherwise. "Dad," she whispered, her voice dropping low, desperate to keep our war private. "What did you—" I leaned closer, the old wooden chair groaning under the weight of bones weathered by time. My voice came out low and steady, a whisper sharpened to a blade's edge. "Funny thing about glasses, Leah. They don't always end up in the hands you plan." Her breath caught a tiny sound, but to me, it filled the air, louder than the whole orchestra of clattering plates and murmured toasts around us. Eleanor tilted her head, her face drawn with confusion. "What's going on between you two? Did I miss something?" she asked, blinking between us. Leah recovered with a sudden cough, covering the crack in her mask. "Nothing, Mother. Just teasing him about his toast." She forced a laugh, brittle again, but this time her voice cracked on the final word. And it wasn't only me who noticed. 2 men at the table behind us turned to look, their brows furrowed. The quiet murmur of nearby conversations shifted, a ripple of unease running through the dining room. I let the silence linger, savoring the weight of her discomfort. Then I raised my water glass, tapping its rim gently with a fingertip so the crystal rang out. When I finally spoke, I pitched my voice just high enough to carry to nearby ears. "To 50 years of honesty," I said, my words wrapped in warmth yet sharpened with steel, "and to never underestimate the old." Cutlery froze midair. The soft clinks of silverware at 2 nearby tables fell still. They weren't meant to hear those words, but they did, and so did Leah. Her chair scraped faintly against the polished wood as she shifted, the sound like nails dragged across my memory. To me, it was music, the sound of a predator realizing it might have been the prey all along. The rest of dinner unfolded like a strange, discordant symphony, the scrape of her knife against her plate, harsh and uneven, as though her grip betrayed her nerves, the ragged rhythm of her breathing, too quick when she thought no one was watching, the way she cleared her throat, again and again, as if to remind herself she still controlled her body. Each sound was a note in the unraveling of her facade. And I sat still. I listened. I had spent a lifetime listening for the creak of a floorboard in the dark, for the whispered shuffle of men plotting behind closed doors, for the distant thunder of storms before they reached the shore. Tonight I listened to Leah breaking, piece by piece, one crack at a time, for all her planning, her careful mask, her meticulous schemes. She had not anticipated this, that I would sit alive, calm and utterly aware, while her own nerves betrayed her with every shallow breath, every trembling movement. And in that realization, I saw the truth shining as clearly as the chandelier above us. The game had only just begun, and I was no stranger to playing long games. It's strange how a crowded room can feel so desolate when betrayal coils through the air. All around me, laughter rang over cocktails and sizzling platters, forks clinked against porcelain, and glasses sang with cheer. Yet to me, it was a hollow chorus, meaningless and distant. The only sound that mattered was the sharp, unblinking silence between Leah and me, her eyes fixed on me, shards of glass ready to cut. I tried to steady myself with Eleanor's voice, her gentle tones weaving another story from the golden years of our youth. She spoke of beaches, of friends now gone, of moments preserved in amber. But my mind was elsewhere, circling Leah like a hawk watching prey. My fork hovered above the untouched steak, appetite drowned in suspicion. Every movement of hers, every twitch of her jaw, every calculated pause, it all screamed louder than words. The truth pressed itself into me with an unbearable weight. This wasn't spontaneous. Leah hadn't simply awoken that morning and decided to lace my drink. No, poison is premeditated. Betrayal like this has roots, tangled and deep. Roots I had been blind to, or worse, willfully ignored. She pushed salmon across her plate, her fork scraping faintly, her hand trembling. Not from sickness, no, not yet, but from suppressed rage. Rage carefully bottled, but leaking through her every gesture. And as I watched, an old memory surfaced, unbidden, sharp as a nail I had once stepped on as a boy. It was months ago. In our kitchen, Eleanor had been speaking to her daughter, their voices carrying through the thin plaster walls. I had been reading the paper in the next room, half listening. Eleanor's voice was tender, protective, filled with love. "You know your stepfather has always taken care of us," she said warmly, as if she were explaining a truth to be treasured. Leah's answer had been softer, but edged like a knife honed in secrecy. "He's taken care of you, Mother, not me. At the time I dismissed it. I thought it jealousy, maybe bitterness about the way I dotted Eleanor's days with gifts. Small tokens, flowers, a new scarf, a surprise dinner out. I thought Leah resented her mother's joy, but now, staring across the candlelit table at her pale, hardening face, I understood there had been more behind those words. Much more. My gaze followed hers as she lingered on the gold watch wrapped around my wrist. Eleanor had given it to me on the day I retired, the band warm against my skin even now. Leah's eyes then darted to the diamond glinting on Eleanor's hand, resting so tenderly on mine. And in that glance, the puzzle assembled itself. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about hate. It was about money, about inheritance, about what she believed was owed to her. A bitter laugh almost rose in me, but I smothered it before it could leave my lips. Instead, I studied her carefully, the way her manicured nails dug crescents into her palm beneath the linen, the way her jaw tensed each time Eleanor laughed, the flicker of something ravenous in her eyes whenever her gaze caught on what belonged to us. I leaned forward, moving my lips just enough for her to see them form the words. "You wanted me gone before the will was read." Her head jerked up. For a heartbeat, her mask slipped, her eyes wide with raw shock. Then, as quick as lightning, the smirk returned, forced, brittle, desperate. "You're imagining things," she muttered, her voice low, clipped, strangled by the truth she couldn't quite conceal. Eleanor glanced between us, concerned, tugging at the corners of her expression. "What are you two whispering about?" she asked gently. "Just family matters?" Leah said swiftly, too swiftly. The words stumbled out with a false lightness that carried the weight of guilt. But my heart thundered, not with fear, but with the sharp, cold clarity of realization. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a transaction in her mind. Leah had not tried to poison me out of simple malice. She had mapped my death into her future. She wanted Eleanor's security to become her own, and wanted the doors I had worked my life to build to swing open at my passing. My fingers gripped the table's edge until the blood drained from my knuckles. Anger filled me, not the wild blaze of youth, but a cold, heavy anger, dense as lead. Betrayal, even by one note of my blood, cut deeper than I had known possible. The betrayal of a child toward a parent, even a step-parent, is a wound that corrodes from within. I wanted to shout it, then and there, to tear the mask from her face and reveal her poison to the entire room. But something steadied me. A whisper in the deepest part of me spoke. Not tonight. Not before Eleanor. Do not let Leah win by turning this celebration into ruin. Do not let her steal Eleanor's joy. So I laid my hand gently atop Eleanor's, steadying her as much as myself, and said softly, "Darling, some truths take time to hear. Tonight, let's enjoy each other." The words cloaked the storm in my chest, and Eleanor smiled faintly, unaware of the war raging inches away. Leah's fork slipped then, clattering against porcelain with a violence that startled the room into silence for a breath. Heads turned. She scrambled, forcing a laugh, covering her stumble, but her cheeks flushed red as the wine in her glass. She knew. She knew I understood her game now, that her mask was gone, that the veil was torn, and in her eyes I saw the flicker of panic, the frantic fear of a predator caught in its own snare. In that moment, I made myself a promise as binding as any vow I had ever spoken. I would not only survive Leah's betrayal, I would make her regret, with every fiber of her being, the day she thought she could bury me beneath champagne bubbles and powdered deceit. And as the orchestra in the corner slid into a slower, darker tune, I felt it deep in my bones. This night was far from finished. Charleston had always been a city of whispers. I learned that long before this anniversary dinner, back when I was still working the docks, where men traded secrets in the shadows of shipping crates and moonlit warehouses. Whispers about contraband shipments, about debts owed, about lives that could be ruined with a single, loose word. But that night, inside the harbor room, the whispers were of a different breed. They weren't about smuggling or backroom deals. They were about us. About her. It started small. A woman in the far corner leaned close to her husband, pearls catching the light as she cupped her mouth to shield the words. Her eyes flicked toward our table, then away. But the damage was done. The ripple had begun. A faint laugh followed at another table, nervous and clipped, and I felt it, the subtle current of curiosity shifting into suspicion. The weight of their stares wasn't overt. Not yet. It was the kind of weight you felt more than saw, like a draft sneaking through an old window, brushing across your neck when the room should have been warm. Eleanor, bless her, didn't notice. She was too caught up in the glow of the evening, her delicate voice retelling stories from our youth, with that familiar sparkle in her eyes. But I noticed, and Leah noticed. Leah shifted, her chair scraping against the polished floorboards, with a sound sharp enough to silence the nearby laughter. Even the jazz trio at the entrance faltered for a breath before resuming their tune. She tried to mask her unease with another painted smile, but the cracks were beginning to show. The lipstick feathered at the edges, her expression stiff as plaster. "Mother," she said too loudly, her voice cutting across the low hum of the dining room, "you must be tired. Maybe we should cut dinner short." But Eleanor only laughed softly, shaking her head, utterly oblivious to the mounting storm. Nonsense. This is our night. Look at them all. They're watching us. They're jealous, you know. 50 years and still holding hands. I squeezed her fingers gently, a bittersweet ache pressing in my chest. She couldn't hear what I heard. She couldn't sense the shift in the air. But I could. Behind me, a man muttered, "Something's off there." A passing waiter, tray balanced with glasses, let a smirk slip as he whispered under his breath, "Family drama. Always the rich ones." Leah heard it too. I saw her eyes darting around, pupils wide, her confidence unraveling thread by thread. Her mask was slipping, and panic bled through. She snapped suddenly, her words sharp as shattered glass. "What are you all staring at?" The room froze. Forks hovered mid-air. Wine glasses trembled in motionless hands. For the briefest heartbeat, silence wrapped the restaurant in a suffocating hold. Then it broke. The cover coughs, the nervous titters, the scraping of chairs as people pretended to look away. But the damage was already done. In Charleston, reputation was a fortress, and Leah had just cracked the gate wide open. "Leah," I said evenly, letting my voice carry just enough to be caught by the ears around us. "This is a celebration. Don't shame your mother tonight." Her face twisted, caught between rage and restraint. Her lips parted as if to strike back, then snapped shut with a click of teeth loud enough for those closest to hear. That sound, that tiny, frustrated click, was sweeter to me than any champagne toast. Eleanor turned to her, brows knitting, confusion softening her voice. "Leah, sweetheart, what's gotten into you?" But Leah had no answer. She couldn't. The social noose was tightening, and she felt it coiling. The whispers were multiplying, darting like fish in dark water. She snapped at her father. Someone hissed nearby, "No stepfather." Another corrected in a hushed tone. Still, on their anniversary, every whispered word was a nail driven into her image, into the mask she had so carefully constructed. Every sideways glance was another rope pulled taut around her neck. I leaned forward, lowering my voice but pitching it just right, so those within earshot would catch it. "Careful, Leah. Charleston doesn't forgive public shame, and neither do I." Her hand trembled as she lifted her glass. Ice rattled violently against the crystal, betraying her nerves. She tried to steady it, but the sound betrayed her more than words ever could. Even Eleanor noticed, her frown deepening as her hand pressed tighter onto mine, as though she braced for a storm she could sense, but not see. The truth of her betrayal had already poisoned me, not my body, but my soul. Yet as I sat in that room, listening to the symphony of murmurs building around us, I realized something vital. I didn't need evidence. I didn't need to stand and accuse her. The whispers of Charleston were a weapon sharper than any knife. The court of gossip was already convened, and it would not rule in her favor. All I had to do was sit back, guide the tide with a steady hand, and watch as she unraveled herself before them all. And by the way her voice cracked when she tried to form her next sentence, I knew the unraveling had already begun. The restaurant had become a theater that night, and without realizing it, Leah had stepped onto the stage. The chandeliers above poured golden light down upon us, catching on the polished crystal and gleaming silverware. But it wasn't elegance that filled the room. It was tension, stretched taut like a violin string about to snap. Everyone was watching now, watching her stumble, watching me hold steady, watching Eleanor, dear Eleanor, try with all her fragile heart to stitch the night back together. But some truths don't mend. They spread like spilled ink. They stain. The hush that followed Leah's earlier outburst sat heavy in the air, broken only by the faint clink of glasses and the nervous shuffle of feet. Then the waiter appeared again, his polished shoes whispering against the floorboards. He wore the kind of smile trained in expensive restaurants, the kind that pretends not to see what's happening before his eyes. Balanced on his tray was a small leather folder, embossed with the restaurant's crest. "The bill, sir," he said softly, as if afraid his words might shatter the brittle silence. He placed it before me, with a bow of his head. I reached out, sliding it closer, but Leah's hand struck faster than I expected. With a snap, she snatched it away. Her eyes scanned the figures, and her lips twisted with fury. "Nearly $2,000, she hissed, her voice slicing through the dining room. "For one meal? Are you insane?" The crack of her words rang out louder than the trumpet's last note from the jazz trio. Forks froze in midair. Someone gasped. A chair creaked as its occupant shifted uncomfortably, all pretense of privacy gone. Eleanor's cheeks flushed crimson. She reached out, her voice trembling. "Leah, this is our anniversary dinner. Have some respect." But Leah was unraveling now, her composure shredding thread by thread. "Respect? Do you know how much money he wastes? Do you know what could have been done with this instead of parading around like we're royalty?" She shoved the folder back toward me, the leather striking the table with a slap that echoed through the room. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to, calm as ever. I opened the folder, pulled out my wallet, and slid my black card across the tray. The waiter hesitated, eyes flicking nervously between us. Before retreating into the shadows of the back room, Leah leaned forward, her voice lowering to a dagger's whisper, yet sharp enough to cut through the restaurant's quiet. "Do you know what he's done with the will, Mother? Do you even know what you're going to be left with?" Her words detonated in the room, murmurs exploded around us, fragments of conversation carried by the thick Charleston air. Even the jazz trio faltered again, the trumpet squealing slightly before the pianist covered the mistake. Eleanor's eyes widened in disbelief, her fingers trembling as they tightened around my hand. "Leah, what are you talking about?" I leaned back, heart steady, watching the trap close. I knew exactly what Leah was doing, trying to expose me, to humiliate me, to turn this dinner into my reckoning. But she hadn't realized she was tightening the noose around her own neck. "You never asked, did you, Mother?" Leah pressed, her voice now laced with desperation. "Because he's been hiding it. He thinks I don't know." The whispers swelled, no longer hidden but open, curious, cruel. "The will?" a woman whispered loudly to her husband. "He's hiding something," another man muttered, leaning forward to hear better. The harbor room, once filled with laughter and celebration, had transformed into a courtroom, and Leah, in her blind rage, had become both prosecutor and condemned. Eleanor's voice broke, pleading. "Leah, please, not tonight." But Leah's laugh was jagged, bitter. "Oh, it's the perfect night. Let everyone see the truth." Her hand slammed against the table, rattling silverware and sending ripples through the water glasses. "He's leaving everything to you, Mother. And when you're gone, to me. He's already locked it away in his precious documents. The house, the savings, the jewelry. He thinks he's clever, but I know. I've seen the papers, and he can't stop me from taking what's mine." The gasp that followed was unlike the scattered murmurs from before. It was collective, sharp, a single breath drawn in by every soul in the room, not just strangers now. Eleanor herself reeled from the revelation, her face crumpled, her eyes wide with a grief deeper than any slap could have dealt. You've been digging through our things," she whispered, her voice fragile as glass. "Leah, how could you?" Leah froze. She hadn't meant to reveal that. Not in front of Eleanor, not in front of witnesses whose whispers would become stories by morning. And I felt the cold satisfaction of a fisherman who finally feels the line go taut, the heavy thrash of the catch on the hook. Years of suspicion had led to this single moment of confirmation. I leaned forward, folding my hands as if in prayer, my voice steady, deliberate, and cruelly calm. "Leah, you've just confessed more than you realize." Her head snapped toward me, panic sparking in her eyes. For the first time that night, she looked small, trapped, cornered, because in that instant, she wasn't the sharp-tongued stepdaughter anymore. She wasn't even the protective daughter shielding her mother. She was the greedy interloper who had just exposed herself. Her entitlement, her betrayal, her willingness to poison and pry, all under Charleston's brightest chandelier. And the whispers? They were no longer whispers. They were judgments, verdicts. Charleston's court of reputation had delivered its ruling. Leah had wanted me destroyed, but in her arrogance, she had destroyed herself. And as the waiter returned with my card on its silver tray, the murmurs swirling into open disdain, I knew the social fallout had begun, and she would never escape it. By the time the waiter returned with my credit card, the air in the harbor room had changed. It wasn't festive anymore. It was thick, oppressive, charged like the air before a storm tears open the sky. You could taste the heaviness on the tongue, feel the crackle just under the skin. Outside, through the tall windows, Charleston's summer night had soured. Clouds gathered low, dark as spilled ink, pressing down on the harbor like a lid on a boiling pot. The last golden streaks of sunset had vanished, replaced by a restless gray. I could almost hear the storm breathe, building its chest before it roared. The waiter, a poor boy, tried to keep his smile polished, but his eyes betrayed him. He set the receipt down gently, too gently, as though afraid it might shatter the silence. His gaze flickered to Leah, then away just as fast, shame tinting his cheeks. He had heard. They all had. There was no pretending anymore. The scrape of pens, signing checks, the shifting of shoes across the carpet, the clink of crystal. It all sounded sharper because everyone was straining to catch our next words. Leah fumbled with her shawl, tugging it tight around her shoulders like a child clutching a blanket. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, though too loudly to sound convincing. Her voice wavered, brittle, breaking against the hush of the room. "We should leave." "No." Eleanor's voice cut through, firm, steady, stronger than I had heard it all night. It startled both of us. "We are not leaving until I understand what's happening here." The storm outside groaned in agreement, a low rumble of thunder vibrating against the glass. The chandeliers swayed ever so slightly, as though the storm had reached inside the room. "Mother, please," Leah begged, her hand trembling against the back of her chair. "Let's go before this gets worse." "It's already worse," Eleanor said. Her eyes glistened with tears she was fighting to contain. "You've shamed your father, you've shamed me, and you've shamed yourself. What is this poison in your heart, Leah?" That word, poison, hung in the air like smoke. It landed heavier than she knew. Leah stiffened, her body jerking as though Eleanor had called her crime by name. For a heartbeat, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Then the storm answered. Lightning split the harbor, a jagged white scar that threw the room into stark relief. In its glow, Leah's face was a canvas of panic, skin pale, eyes wide, lips pressed tight to hold in the truth. I let the thunder that followed carry my words. My voice was deep, steady, woven into the growl of the storm. Leah wanted this night to end with my silence. Not my words, not my laughter, not even my breath. But she underestimated me. Gasps rippled, murmurs followed, hushed and sharp. The storm rattled the tall windows as if to punctuate the moment. Leah's chair scraped back violently. She surged to her feet, her chair toppling with a clatter that echoed off the polished wood. "He's lying," she screamed, her voice shrill, cutting through the first sheets of rain hammering against the roof. "He's an old man, confused, paranoid." But the weather betrayed her. Thunder cracked overhead, drowning her words, rattling the chandeliers until the crystals chimed like alarm bells. The diners flinched, not at the storm, but at her. When the rumble faded, what lingered was the sound of Leah's ragged breath. Too fast, too loud. Her mask was gone, stripped bare by panic. "Mother, you know me." She tried again, her voice quivering. "You know I'd never—" Eleanor's tears slipped free. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I don't know you at all." The words gutted the room. You could hear them sink into Leah's chest, see her body jolt like she'd been struck. The storm pressed harder, rain drumming against the glass in furious rhythm, the scent of salt and wet stone bleeding into the dining room each time the doors opened for a fleeing guest. I rose, slow, deliberate. My bones protested, but my resolve was steel. My voice carried with the gravity of a final verdict. "You wanted to bury me tonight, Leah, but instead you've buried yourself." Look around, she did, and the truth hit her harder than any storm. Every diner had turned, every waiter had frozen mid-step. No one pretended anymore. Every eye bore down on her, unblinking, judging. Charleston society was small, insular, merciless. What was seen here tonight would be retold tomorrow, twisted, amplified, immortalized. Leah was finished, and she knew it. Her chest heaved. Her breath rasped. She clutched the back of her chair as though it could hold her up against the weight of the stairs, crushing her down. She looked like a woman drowning in her own mistakes. And as I studied her, something unexpected stirred inside me. I saw not only greed, not only cruelty, I saw desperation. Desperation was raw and ugly, driving her to claw at what she thought was hers, even if it meant destroying the ones who loved her. Desperation had warped her, poisoned her, twisted her into this creature gasping before me. The storm outside cracked again, lightning painting her silhouette against the tall windows, rain thrashing the glass, as if the heavens themselves demanded her confession. I knew then, desperate people don't surrender quietly. Desperate people lash out, and Leah was far from done. The storm had only just begun. The storm followed us out of the harbor room, clinging to our clothes and our silence. Rain fell in sheets, rattling against the cobblestones as we hurried to the car. The gas lamps lining the narrow street flickered in the downpour, their flames bending and bowing like penitents in prayer. Eleanor clutched my arm, her silk shawl plastered to her shoulders, while Leah stalked a few steps behind us, her heels splashing through puddles with sharp, angry cracks that echoed against the stone walls of Charleston's old buildings. But I wasn't thinking of the rain. My mind was already racing ahead, shaping what came next. Charleston is not a city of strangers. Its houses are old and thin-walled, its porches alive with gossip, its neighborhoods a closed circle, where everyone knows far more than they ought to. Secrets do not stay secrets here. They echo down streets like hymnals. I knew if I played this right, I wouldn't need to shout the truth about Leah. The city itself would carry the whispers for me, and those whispers would grow until they swallowed her whole. But before the city could work its cruel magic, I needed to prepare. That night, as Eleanor slept beside me, her breath shallow, exhausted by tears she couldn't explain, I sat in my study with the storm still raging against the windows. The rain rattled the panes like impatient fingers. I unlocked the heavy oak drawer where I kept my files, the papers Leah believed were her birthright, the will, the property deeds, bank statements, receipts. every fragile symbol of the stability she wanted to rip away from me, from us. I spread them across the desk, like a gambler, laying out his cards, the lamp casting a golden glow over the neat stacks. My fingers trembled, not from age but from a purpose sharpened by betrayal. These documents were more than ink and signatures. They were chains, and Leah believed she would inherit them whole. She thought killing me would make her the mistress of every key, every lock, every hidden vault. But she was wrong. Paper is power only in the right hands. In the wrong ones, it becomes a noose. And I was already fashioning hers, one thread at a time. The plan began with whispers of my own. A phone call to an old friend at the bank who owed me loyalty from the days when I helped cover a mistake that might have ruined him. Another to a lawyer, a man who had walked me through stormier times and still carried debts he'd rather forget. And finally, a call to one of Charleston's sharpest tongues, a woman who lived for society luncheons and champagne secrets, the kind who could turn suspicion into scandal with nothing more than a raised eyebrow over a crystal glass. As the rain softened toward dawn, I leaned back in my chair. The house creaked softly, settling against the storm. The smell of wet magnolia drifted faintly from the garden. My heartbeat was steady, calmer than it had been in months. For the first time that night, I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The days that followed became a performance. Leah tried to mask her panic with forced cheer. She arrived at Eleanor's bedside with flowers too bright, too perfect, their scent cloying in the humid air. She cooked elaborate breakfasts she never used to bother with. Grits, biscuits, eggs over easy, even fresh-pressed juice, all served with a trembling smile. She offered to run errands, humming tunelessly as she left, returning with groceries no one had asked for. But beneath the painted gestures, I saw the desperation. Every time her eyes flicked toward the door of my study, every time her questions about my arrangements slipped into casual conversation, I saw the hunger sharpening beneath her mask. She was waiting for me to stumble, to slip, to die quietly in my chair while she clutched the key to my desk, like a thief clutching stolen jewels. But I didn't stumble. I refused to. Instead, I walked the halls with a steadier step than I'd shown in years, whistling old sailors' tunes as I poured my morning coffee. I kissed Eleanor on the forehead in the kitchen, slow and deliberate, making sure Leah was there to watch the small tenderness she could never counterfeit. I greeted neighbors at the gate with warm familiarity, shaking hands, sharing light jokes, each word planting itself as carefully as a seed in spring. Every gesture said the same thing. I was strong. I was vigilant. I was untouchable. And at night, when Leah believed I had finally fallen into the deep sleep of an old man, I left the lamp burning in my study. A beacon, a warning, a silent promise that I was still awake, still working, still steps ahead of her. The paranoia began to seep into her like a slow poison. I caught her staring at me too long across the dinner table. Her fork paused in midair, her smile stretched thin. I heard her breath stutter when the phone rang unexpectedly, saw her flinch when neighbors stopped by the house unannounced. Her fingers drummed nervously against the counter as she washed dishes, her eyes darting toward the shadows as if she expected some hidden truth to leap out and devour her. She knew her control was slipping. She just didn't know how or when it would snap. And that was the beauty of it. Revenge was never about shouting. It wasn't about striking first. It was about patience, about letting your enemy's own fear hollow them out from the inside until there was nothing left but panic and weakness. And Leah? She was already devouring herself. Every glance, every twitch, every forced smile was another bite taken out of her own resolve. The city was watching. The walls were whispering. The noose was tightening. and she hadn't even felt the rope around her neck yet. Charleston demanded spectacle. If you wanted to bury someone, you didn't do it with fists or shadows. You did it with a stage, with an audience, with every whisper sharpened into a dagger. Leah thought she had poisoned me into silence. But I had other plans. I would let the city itself be my accomplice. The opportunity came quicker than I imagined. A week later, Eleanor, in her eternal kindness, decided to host a garden luncheon. She wanted to thank friends who had sent cards and flowers for our anniversary, but I knew what she truly needed: comfort, proof that goodness still lived around her after the chaos Leah had woven into our celebration. And I saw it instantly, the perfect arena for my trap. The morning of the luncheon, the sun returned with vengeance. The storm had scrubbed the sky, leaving it a hard, unbroken blue. The air smelled of magnolias and wet grass, heavy with the sweetness that only follows a Charleston summer rain. Our lawn stretched wide, white tables set like chess pieces across the green, each adorned with crystal goblets that caught the light in fractured rainbows. Eleanor floated between them in her pale blue dress, fragile but luminous, her smile wavering but sincere. Leah arrived in silks, polished and gleaming like a blade fresh from the whetstone. Her bracelets jingled with every exaggerated laugh, each sound thin, desperate. She fluttered from guest to guest, pouring on charm as though she could drown their memories of the harbor room in compliments and false sweetness. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted to me again and again, calculating, waiting for a move she couldn't predict. I gave her the move. I rose slowly, leaning on the table as I stood, my joints stiff, but my purpose strong. Conversation trickled into silence. Even the cicadas seemed to pause in their endless hymn. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, expectant. "Friends," I began, my voice steady, measured, carrying across the garden. 50 years of marriage is a blessing few men live to see. I owe my life to Eleanor, and I owe my peace to all of you gathered here. Applause is rippled, polite, and warm, but I lifted my hand, silencing it. Peace, I continued, letting my tone darken, is not given. It is guarded, even, especially, against those closest to us. A shift ran through the tables, smiles faltered, heads tilted, Leah's painted grin cracked. I reached under my chair and lifted a leather folder, the one Leah had seen me guard all these years. Gasps broke from the crowd like birds startled from a tree. In Charleston, a manila file carried weight. It meant secrets, power, ruin. "This folder," I said, opening it with deliberate slowness, "contains the truth of my estate, my will, my deeds, my legacy. And recently someone tried to take it from me." Eyes darted to Leah. Her lips twitched, her knuckles white against the stem of her glass. "That's absurd," she snapped, too quick, too sharp. I let the silence that followed swallow her words whole before speaking again. No lock can keep out greed. No wall can guard against poison poured into a glass. The garden stiffened. The air itself seemed to still. Eleanor froze, her hand trembling at her throat. Leah shot to her feet, bracelets clattering. "He's lying, twisting everything. I slammed the folder shut, the clap echoing like thunder across the lawn. Guests flinched. The cicada started again in a fever pitch. "You confessed at the harbor room?" I said, voice like iron. "Half the city heard you. You spoke of wills, of property, of what you believed was yours. You shamed your mother. You shamed me. And now, all here will hear it, too." The guests erupted in whispers, sharp as glass shards. "She poisoned him?" Someone hissed. "She admitted it," another gasped. "Greedy wretch," a third spat under their breath. Leah's eyes darted left and right, seeking escape, but the crowd had penned her in with stares and murmurs. Her mask collapsed into panic. I pulled a single sheet from the folder, holding it high. The sunlight illuminated the embossed seal like scripture. "This is my new will," I declared. "It leaves everything, not to Leah, not to her schemes, but to Eleanor, and to the charities she holds dear. Every stone, every dollar, every ring. Leah will inherit nothing. Not a dime, not a trinket, nothing." The roar of voices was immediate. Eleanor gasped, tears spilling in silent relief. Friends clasped her hands, murmuring comfort. The garden itself seemed to bend toward justice, the magnolias swaying as if nodding along. Leah collapsed into her chair, her face ashen, her voice breaking. "You can't do this," she whispered, but I had already done it, and Charleston had witnessed it all. After the luncheon, silence settled on our house like dust, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating silence of endings. It pressed into the walls, seeped into the floorboards, and lingered in every corner where laughter once lived. Leah locked herself away in her room for 2 full days, curtains drawn, trays of food left untouched outside her door, her presence reduced to nothing more than the faint shuffle of footsteps in the night. Eleanor, meanwhile, drifted through the halls like a ghost, her eyes swollen and red, torn between the love of a mother and the betrayal of a daughter. And me, I sat alone in my study, staring at the leather folder that had once been my shield and now had become my sword. It rested on my desk, heavy with the weight of everything it had ended. Outside our walls, Charleston buzzed like a hornet's nest. At the market, I caught whispers behind baskets of peaches. At the post office, I heard murmurs slip between stamps and envelopes. From porch to porch, across wrought iron fences and magnolia-lined streets, the story spread like wildfire. Did you hear about the stepdaughter who tried to poison him? About the will? About the luncheon? No evidence was demanded. No police were summoned. Charleston didn't need courts or trials. In this city, reputation was punishment enough. Overnight, Leah went from socialite to pariah. Invitations evaporated. Friends crossed the street rather than greet her. Servants whispered behind gloved hands. When she finally emerged from her room, pale and hollow, the eyes of the neighborhood followed her like shadows she could never shake. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought the bitterness would taste sweet, like a bourbon left to age decades in an oak barrel. But when the dust truly settled, all that remained was a strange emptiness. Sitting in that quiet study, the ticking of the mantel clock the only sound, something else crept in. A weight heavier than revenge, sorrow, because revenge doesn't fill the empty places. It only reminds you they're there. One evening, Eleanor stepped into my study. She didn't knock. She simply appeared, her figure framed by the fading glow of a Charleston sunset, orange light spilling through lace curtains. She rested one hand on the windowsill, the other clutching a handkerchief she had wrung nearly to threads. "You've protected us," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes held mine with a fragile strength. "You did what you had to." I wanted to believe her, but the memory wouldn't leave me. The sight of Leah crumpled in that garden chair, her painted face cracked, her voice breaking into that desperate whisper, "You can't do this." It hadn't sounded like defiance. It hadn't sounded like a villain caught in her own snare. No. It had sounded like a child begging her father not to turn away. And though she was never mine by blood, she had once been mine by choice. The next morning I found her suitcase waiting by the front door, worn leather, scuffed edges. She stood beside it, a figure stripped of all artifice. No jewels glittered at her throat, no paint brightened her lips. Just Leah, the girl I'd first met years ago when she was a sullen teenager, glaring at the man her mother had dared to love. She didn't meet my eyes. "I can't stay here," she murmured. Her voice was raw, frayed like a rope worn thin. "Not after what I've done. Not after what you've done." Eleanor wept openly, clutching her daughter in trembling arms, rocking her as if Leah were still a child with skinned knees instead of a grown woman with a shattered reputation. I stood a few paces back, my hands folded neatly behind me, watching, my heart heavier than it had ever been. And then Leah was gone. The door opened. The summer heat spilled in, and she stepped out into the humid Charleston air. Down the street she walked, her plain dress clinging to her in the sticky heat, her figure shrinking against the horizon until she was nothing but another shadow swallowed by the city. She carried no jewelry, no keepsakes, no claim to a fortune, only shame. For weeks afterward, the house was unbearably quiet. Too quiet. Eleanor's laughter faded to memory. Her footsteps grew slow and weighted, her spirit dimmed by grief. I had saved her from poison, from betrayal, from a daughter's cruel ambition. Yet in doing so, I had also taken something irreplaceable from her. The chance to still call that daughter her own, and so, one humid evening, I sat on the porch, alone, the air thick with cicadas singing their endless dirge. The sky glowed deep purple, the scent of wet earth rising from the garden, and the rocking chair beneath me creaked in steady rhythm. I looked out at the street where Leah had walked away, and I wondered, not for the first time, if I had truly won at all, because victory, I had learned, can sometimes sound an awful lot like loss. The years have a way of softening even the sharpest cuts, but scars, they remain, etched into the skin of memory where no one else can see them. And when the night is quiet, when the cicadas sing their chorus and the world pretends to sleep, those scars ache like fresh wounds. It has been 3 summers since that stormy night in Charleston, 3 summers since the chandeliers rattled in the harbor room, since Leah's voice cracked under thunder, since Eleanor's tears glistened like shattered pearls. And though time has carried us forward, it has not carried us away. Eleanor and I still sit on the porch every evening, side by side, rocking in rhythm with the hum of the night. The oaks stretch tall above us, their branches dripping with Spanish moss that sways in the breeze like whispers of ghosts. The air smells of honeysuckle and brine, of old wood and older secrets. Yet there's always an empty chair across from us, one we never move. We don't fill it with guests. We don't stack it away in storage. It just sits there, year after year, a monument to the daughter Eleanor lost and the stepdaughter I destroyed. Leah never returned. Word came in fragments, carried by the same gossip mill that once crowned her a darling of Charleston. Someone said she'd been seen in Savannah, working in a bookstore, her hair tied back, her jewelry sold. Later, another claimed she'd moved farther north, to a modest apartment in some gray town where no one knew her name. No one cared about her fall. No soirée, no champagne, no inheritance, just silence. At first I let myself savor it. I won't lie to you. I felt a grim satisfaction. Her punishment was not by law or prison bars, but by exile from everything she had once prized. My revenge had worked, too well, but satisfaction has a short life, like bourbon burning down the throat. It stings, it warms, and then it leaves you empty. And when that emptiness came, I was left staring at my reflection in the bottom of a glass, asking myself, what had I really won? I had stripped Leah of wealth, reputation, and power. I had shown her to Charleston for what she was, but I had also stripped Eleanor of her child, and no amount of justice can fill that kind of hollow. Many nights as Eleanor slept beside me, I lay awake. I stared at the ceiling fan as it spun lazy circles above, whispering its constant hollow breath. My mind drifted to that garden luncheon, to Leia's face, as pale as the tablecloth, to her whisper, "You can't do this." It hadn't sounded like defiance. It sounded like a plea, like a little girl begging her father not to abandon her. And though she was never mine by blood, she had once been mine by choice. And choices, they weigh heavier than blood. Last winter, Eleanor's strength began to falter. It was no sudden collapse, no violent fall, just the slow, inevitable fading of a woman who had borne too many burdens and hidden too many tears. Her hands, once steady, grew fragile as paper. Her laughter, once bright as bells, became soft as whispers. One evening, as frost rimmed the garden outside, I tucked the quilt around her shoulders. She reached for my hand, her skin cool, her grip weak but certain. "Promise me something, love," she whispered. "Anything," I said, and I meant it. Her eyes, dimmed by illness but burning with that old fire I had fallen in love with 50 years ago, met mine. "Don't let bitterness be your only legacy. You've been strong, but Leah, she's still my child. If I'm gone before you, don't let her disappear completely. Find her. Tell her I loved her." Her voice wavered. A tear slid from the corner of her eye, and in that moment, I saw not the woman broken by betrayal, but the mother whose love refused to die, even when tested by poison and shame. I promised her. I had no choice, and that promise reshaped me. For months, I had been defined by revenge. Every step I took, every word I spoke, every plan I laid was sharpened by the hunger to see Leah fall. But after Eleanor's plea, I began to see the horizon differently. Legacy wasn't just about land or money or whispered tales at the market. Legacy was about what we choose to leave behind, not the ashes of our rage, but the embers of our compassion. So I rewrote my will, not to restore Leah's inheritance. She had forfeited that with her greed and her cruelty, but I left her something small, something symbolic. Eleanor's pearl brooch, the one she wore at our wedding, the one that gleamed at her collar in every anniversary photo. Not because it was worth much, but because it was priceless in memory, because it was Eleanor's, and through it, Eleanor could still speak to her child. The rest of my estate will still go to Eleanor's charities, her schools, her hospitals, her shelters. Her kindness will ripple long after we are gone, but Leah will not be erased. Somewhere, someday, when she opens that small box and finds her mother's brooch waiting, she will know. She was not forgotten. Not by her mother, not by me. And perhaps in that moment, her bitterness will bend. Perhaps she will sit quietly, brooch in hand, and remember the mother who loved her beyond betrayal, and the stepfather who survived her cruelty but chose not to erase her. Now, as I sit here on the porch, the summer air thick and sweet, cicadas crying into the dusk, Eleanor's hand still resting warm in mine, I understand at last what legacy means. It isn't the gold watch on my wrist. It isn't the deeds in the desk drawer. It isn't the whispers of Charleston society halls. Legacy is the choice we make in the shadow of betrayal. It's the choice to leave behind not just scars, but a chance, however small, for redemption. It's the decision to let forgiveness speak louder than revenge. Because in the end, I don't want Leah to remember me as the stepfather who destroyed her. I want her to remember me as the man who survived her, forgave her, and carried her mother's love into the future. That is my final toast. Not to poison, not to betrayal, not to revenge, but to legacy.